Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to revisit the installation process for Ekos Indi on a Raspberry Pi. This replaces the previous YouTube videos I did on the Ekos Indi installation parts 1 through 3. I think you'll find that this method is much easier and much quicker, and there's very minimal interaction during the process. Hi, let's go over the installation features. It's easy to deploy. It replaces my old YouTube installation videos, parts 1 through 3. It installs Ekos Indi and supporting software with minimal user interaction. It supports the latest Ubuntu LTS release. You'll need a Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gigabytes of memory. A Raspberry Pi with 2 gigabytes of memory should work, but I haven't tested it. A minimum 16 gigabyte Class 10 SD card, Ethernet cable, and access to a router for internet connection. And you'll need to download a release zip file from GitHub. Now here's my GitHub project release. You'll need to go to this URL and download the file indicated in yellow. This is the distribution zip file that contains 3 files. It contains the tar file, a run first script, as well as the instructions. Please refer to the instructions when performing this installation because it covers the installation completely. Here's an installation overview. We need to create an SD image of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS using the Raspberry Pi Imager. Now this software can be run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. You'll need to download the zip file I mentioned earlier from GitHub and extract that into a working directory. Once the image is created, you'll need to take the SD card and mount the system boot partition, and then you add essentially 2 files to the boot partition. One is the runfirst.sh script, and the other is a script tar file. And then you unmount the SD card. From there, you insert the SD card into a Raspberry Pi, and you'll connect the Ethernet cable to the Raspberry Pi and router, power up the Pi, and determine the IP address. Then you'll use an SSH client to log into the IP address using the user Ubuntu. Now, when you first log in, you'll be prompted for a password change. And once the password change has been made, you'll be kicked out and you'll have to relog in. You'll have to change directories into the boot firmware area and then run the script runfirst.sh. You'll have to answer numerous prompts and then the system will automatically reboot. After a reboot, log in as Ekos, and when you do, you'll be prompted to optionally install PHD2 software. And finally, you'll need to run the Wi-Fi setup script. Now, I know it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. Let's go ahead and get started on this process, and you'll find that it's pretty easy to do and follow. All right, the first thing we need to do is to create an SD card using the Raspberry Pi Imager. So I'm going to bring up the Raspberry Pi Imager, and we'll go ahead and create the image. Again, just like the other videos, you want to choose the other general OS. Click on that. Find the Ubuntu. Click on that. Go down to where it says the 64-bit 20.04.3 LTS release. Click on that. I've already inserted the SD card. It should be a Class 10 SD card. Click on Choose Media. In this case, I have a 32-bit or 32 gig SD card. I'll click on that and I'll write. Now, as this thing continues, it will write and it'll verify. So I'm going to pause this, and when this is ready to be removed, I'll go ahead and come back and start the video back up. It would be a good idea to go ahead and download the instructions for this process. It could be found in this video's video description area, a link to it, or you could download it at the GitHub repository where I indicated in the project area. And it's also part of the zip file. Okay, once the SD card is written to, go ahead and hit the continue button. And we are done with the Raspberry Pi imager. I'll go ahead and close this out. Go ahead and remove the SD card from the reader, and then reinsert the SD card into the reader. What this will do is automatically mount the two partitions. Now, if you're under a Windows system, you will not have the ext4 partition in Linux, but the Windows partition should show up. And in this case, it's system boot is the label. So once it's mounted, go ahead and click on it and bring up the file manager, and you'll see the system boot area. The next step is to go ahead and download the distribution file from GitHub. Now, I've already done so, and the file is already right here. I placed it in the desktop workspace. I will go ahead and extract that here. It will create a folder on the desktop called Ekos Indi RPI4_V6. The V6 stands for the 0.06 release. Anyway, go ahead and open this folder. You'll find three files in the folder. One is the documentation, and then the two other files are the executable script and the tar file. The two files that you want to copy over are the run first shell script and the tar file. Go ahead and copy that and move that over into the system boot partition. I've done so. I'm going to go ahead and close this window, and you'll see that it's been added to the system boot file system. Once you're done with that, go ahead and eject the CD, and from there we're ready to install onto your Raspberry Pi 4. So I'm going to go ahead and install the SD card in the Raspberry Pi 4 and power it up, and we'll go on from there. I have inserted the SD card in the Raspberry Pi 4 and powered it on and connected it up to my switch, which is also connected up to the router. From there, it's booting up, and I see that it's booting up based on the lights. And I'm giving it just a few minutes, and then I'm going to go ahead and log in. So what we want to do is we want to take an SSH client and log into the Raspberry Pi. In this case, I'm using Linux, and I'm using the standard terminal window to do so. All right, what we need to do now is to SSH into the Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to use the terminal window in Linux as the SSH client and log into the Raspberry Pi. So the command for doing that is SSH Ubuntu at 192.168.15.61. Now you need to have the Ubuntu in front of that command so that it logs into the Raspberry Pi as the user Ubuntu. Go ahead and type yes to this question and type in the password. And the password, the default password for the image is Ubuntu. Once you're logged in, it's going to go through a password change process. So go ahead and type in the password again, Ubuntu, and your new password. Once you've changed the password, it's going to log you out. Now go back and do the same command, but this time log in with your new password. The next thing you want to do is to change directories into boot/firmware. So cd/boot/firmware. Hit a return. And then the command you want to use is sudo bash run_first.sh. Hit a return. Now this will start the build process off. What I'm going to do is speed up the video so you can see the full process occur. Now, I wanted to bring up one thing as we're going through this installation process. It is possible that when you first log into Ubuntu, that it might kick off an update process. If it kicks off an update process, the installation will fail waiting for the apt process to be completed. If that happens, I would go ahead and stop the installation process, wait about 30 minutes, and then restart the run first script. This will restart the process, and it should complete correctly after doing so. Okay, go ahead and select your time zone. In this case, I am in the US Central. And then what you want to do is enter the host name of your server. In this case, I'm going to be using Indi server test. And now it's prompting me for the password for Ekos. Go ahead and enter a password for the user Ekos. And I normally just use the same password throughout the system, so it's probably not very secure, but also it's not online all the time, and I'm not too worried about the security, especially within my own network. Okay, now select Light DM for the Light Manager by using the Tab key. By highlighting the Light DM and hitting the Tab and hit OK. Now you want to enter the VNC password. This is the password you're going to be using to access the server using the VNC client. And when it prompts you to write to root, go ahead and type return or Y for yes. Now that it disabled the sleep function, it's going to go ahead and reboot the system. Wait about 60 seconds and relog back into the Raspberry Pi, but instead of using the user Ubuntu, use the user Ekos. So I'm going to do an SSH Ekos at 192.168.15.61. It'll prompt you for your Ekos password. You've already given that during the installation. And once it gets completed to log in, it will prompt you, do you wish to build the PhD2 software? Now you could go ahead and type no or yes. If you type no, you could run this program to build the software at a later date, and it's covered in the documentation. We could go over that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and type in Y for installation. We're going to go ahead and build the software and install the software. During this process, what it's doing is the software is installing the development software that is required to build PhD2 software. After it installs that software, it then clones the PhD2 software from GitHub. And then once it does that, it will start building the software. Right now, what we're seeing is it's cloning the PhD2 software from GitHub. And once that gets completed, it will start building the software. Okay, it's creating the build environment right now. And now it's starting to build the software. So when this becomes about 100%, the build process should be completed. Whether you installed PhD2 or not, the next step is to install the Wi-Fi or set up the Wi-Fi for your system. And for this, I'm using a script, and the script is called Wi-Fi_setup.sh. So this will prompt you for the SSID name and the SSID password. Once you've entered the SSID password and SSID, it will then go ahead and configure the Wi-Fi for the password and SSID and apply the changes to the system. And then once it's completed, it will display the connection status. Now, in this case, the Wi-Fi is not actually set up, but I'm going to go ahead and do that again. Now, this script you could run over and over. So if you make a mistake in adding your SSID name or password, you could rerun the script. And let me show you the outcome of that. So once you've connected, it should be in a green status, and you should see that the NetPlan WLAN 0 device is active, and the hotspot is inactive. And that's all there is to do setting up the Wi-Fi system. There are a couple commands you could use to check the Wi-Fi system. You could do an IPAS. This will display the status of your network devices. And you're looking for the WLAN 0 device, and you'll still see that we are still connected using the ETH0 device up here. The other thing you could do is do an IWconfig, and this will display the status of the connection and what the signal level is. And again, if you don't get connected on the Wi-Fi and it doesn't show a green status, rerun the setup_Wi-Fi shell script and verify that the password and SSID were entered correctly. Now, there's a couple additional programs that I am providing. One is the WC greeter control, and I'll go through that. And the other thing is the hotspot network. So let's go through the Light DM and X11 server configuration. There's a program called VNC_greeter_control.sh. And what that will do is it will prompt you for setting up X11 services. And it'll also set up the Windows Greeter Manager setting. Now, I think once you've installed the software, by default, the window greeter is running. And if you want to stop that, you select 2. You want to say, I want to stop. In this case, it's not started. but if it was and you wanted to stop, it will prompt you. And then you have a choice of disabling that at the boot time. This is for a minimum configuration if you're not interested in using X11 and talking to your Raspberry Pi, which most of us want to do that because it's somewhat more lightweight by not doing that. Go ahead and select no. Now, that doesn't mean you can't still bring up X11 service. It just means that it's not going to be brought up when you reboot your system. So let's say now you go, well, I'm ready to run X11, or I want to run an X11 and client software. We could select the option 1, and we can start the service. And it'll prompt you if you want to enable that at boot time. I'm going to put no because I want to keep this system lightweight. And that's about it. Now, we could go ahead and let me pause this and bring up the X11 client, and I'll show you a quick display here. I'm using Ramina, and I think I discussed this in part 3 of the old video. I'll go ahead and bring this online using the server here. And you'll notice that it gets you'll be prompted. Let me make this full screen here. You'll be prompted for the Ekos user password. Once it comes up, we could go ahead and skip this online accounts. And you can next through this if you want to set up the desktop. But I basically am showing you the information about the desktop and usage. So as you see, I am under an X11 desktop display, and everything here is on the Raspberry Pi is working. Now, I don't want to go into the details of using Ubuntu, but there are various things that you can do. For instance, you could bring up your applications, bring up all your applications, and then you could search for, whoops, just had it here, K-stars. I'm sorry, I keep on going past it. Right click and add to favorites, and you'll notice that it gets added over here. Likewise, you could do this with PhD2. Add to favorites. And there are other programs that you could add if you want to. The other thing is you could click on K-stars and bring up K-stars. And of course, this is the first run. And I believe there's more information about this in the part 1 part 4 and part 4A and part 4B videos. And I go into a little more details. It's all relevant still. So let's go ahead and terminate this. I'll log back out. I'll disconnect from the VNC server. I'll get rid of this. And we could go ahead and run this script again to stop the VNC services. So again, type in 1. It will prompt you. It sees that there is a service running. Yes, we want to stop it. And no, we don't want to re-enable that on boot. And that's it. Now that will turn off the X11 services as well as the desktop, light DM desktop. So I think that's about it for now. I think you could agree with me that this installation process was much easier and more streamlined. I am going to be putting out another quick release of a couple of fixes I found. And so when you go through and download, make sure you choose the correct version. It should be 0.6A or 0.7. I haven't decided how I'm going to name it, but make sure you're downloading the latest release of the distribution. One more thing I'd like to mention is the fact that I've also included a backup script with the packages. This backup script is kind of interesting because it allows you to create an image from your running Raspberry Pi, and you could use that as a backup. And the information about the backup script is part of the documentation. If you're interested in that and you would like to be able to back up your Raspberry Pi on the fly, I recommend that you use that. The advantages to using it is it's easy to back up and easy to restore. Essentially, you're going to be creating an image file on a USB thumb drive, and then you would take that file that you've created on the thumb drive and put it over to your Windows or Mac or Linux system and use the Raspberry Pi imager to create a new SD card. Now, the issue with SD cards is that they do have limited write cycles, so just be aware that a Raspberry Pi, depending on how often it is used, does have a definitive SD card lifespan. So some of my systems early on used to go about 6 months with heavy usage, and then others have lasted much longer. And I do have to say the new SD cards out on the market seem to be a little more tolerant and last a lot longer. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Again, it's in the documentation. Feel free to reuse it. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I encourage people to try this. And if not, that's fine too. Anyway, you have a great rest of the day and clear skies. And don't forget to click like and subscribe. Thanks.